Hello and welcome to The Exchange. I'm your host, Antony Currie. Water scarcity is a fast-growing problem. According to the United Nations, by 2030, the world's population will have only 60% of the water it needs unless action is taken. Writer and entrepreneur Seth Siegel's book, Let There Be Water, explains how one nation may offer a solution. Seth, thanks for coming on the show. It's great to see you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Now, tell me, your book is all about how Israel became a leader in water security, water technology, basically all things water. Your background, a bit like mine, has nothing to do with water. How did you get into this?
Nothing to do with water. I'm a member of a foreign policy think tank called the Council on Foreign Relations. About 4 years ago, I go to a meeting there. I learn about this serious, grave issue, a crisis coming. I think to myself, hey, I'm an informed citizen. How come I never even heard of this? The word crisis is in the sentence. I should have known about it already. And I went back to my office. I started doing some deep reading about it. I got more and more frightened. But as a businessman, I said, what's the solution to this problem? And I realized that Israel had figured it out from a point of view of governance, from regulation, from technology, and from infrastructure. And I said, this is a model that the world needs to hear.
Yeah, I would say there's probably two other countries as well that have done a fair bit, Australia and Singapore. But I think Israel kind of encapsulates all of it. It starts in a water-stressed area when it's founded in 1947. It's surrounded by enemies, and it manages to create not just an environment where it works for itself, but by now it calls itself a water-rich nation.
It's a water superpower now.
Yeah.
But I tell you something, you're right about Australia and Singapore being fabulous water countries as well. The difference is significant, and that is, most importantly, Singapore is an agriculture-free country. They import all of their foodstuffs. And I thought of using Singapore as a model as well, but since the world uses most of its water for growing food, and in every country in the world except for Singapore and a few others, agriculture eats up about 70 to 90% of the water. I realized that I had to use a country where there is a robust agricultural sector, and therefore Israel really is the model for the world.
So let's start off right at the beginning with you mentioned water governance. If we look at somewhere like California, water rights, they are such a messy issue. Israel sorted it out early on. Water is a common good.
That's correct, and it's an important way of looking at it. And I'm going to predict, even though there's a whole bunch of fights that's going to be had ultimately over water rights and water governance, I think that you're going to have to figure out ways of having a coalescence, of having counties and water authorities figuring out ways of working together, common pricing, common infrastructure, common incentives to both farmers and consumers, because without it, we're just going to have a hodgepodge approach where it's just going to be nothing but more delay in getting the problem solved.
You do actually go through some of the issues Israel had despite having water as a common good. So municipalities would use some of the money from the water authorities they covered to fill budgets. You had what seemed like fights within the Israeli government over which ministry controlled it. And yet it was a common good. So how was that resolved?
Well, what finally came to be is that they came to realize that politics got in the way of solving the problem. And a couple of very brave politicians said, we've got to get out of the way of this mess. Right. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out a way of making this technocratic. We need to make this very professional and get the politicians out of the way. And in terms of budgets and pricing, in Israel they came to conclude a bunch of years ago that they have to charge a real price for water. And in America and most of the world, we don't charge a real price. If we charge a price at all, it's a fanciful price. Yeah. And then municipalities and water authorities and utilities, what they do is they kind of steal the money from their users. Right. They then divert that money to other uses, and the water systems, the water infrastructure, the water technology doesn't get improved. We need to have kind of a lockbox system, and Israel has perfected that.
Israel, it is in a semi-arid region.
60% of the country is desert, though.
Yep. Despite having a great infrastructure that they built over years, despite having water as a common good, despite having lots and lots of infomercials and other things on TV, radio, newspapers saying, save water, the one thing that really got people saving water was a realistic price.
Totally right.
That surprised me.
Totally right. It's a fact that people are always amazed by. Israel spends decades building a water revering culture. And they conserve water. They're smart with their water. They're smart with their water usage. And then they institute a fabulous ad campaign where they have these supermodels having their faces cracked. The Israel is drying out campaign. It reduces consumption another 6, 7, 8%. And then they introduce real pricing, and consumption drops 16% in a single year. Farmers rip out crops and put in new crops. Everybody starts thinking about this in a rational, market-based way. And guess what? It's the benefit of the environment, it's the benefit of the water supply, and it's the benefit of the economy.
Pricing had the biggest impact, the quickest.
And you know, Antony, I want to tell you something. In America and all over the world, we need that same solution, because once people are paying a real price, They're going to start making rational, market-based decisions. And you know what they'll start doing? They'll start using technology that instead of wasting water, instead of flood irrigating a field, they'll sip water with drip irrigation and other great technologies.
And drip irrigation is one of the big ones, which almost didn't happen, as you explain in the book, because the guy who invented it didn't really, in the end, got knocked back so many times he stopped believing in himself. But it worked, in part because of the kibbutz.
In this particular case, clearly private enterprise, ironically coming out of a socialist farm, but private enterprise is really what saved the day. There's a bunch of really crazy people who, not really crazy, but needing badly to build a business other than just agriculture. They decide to double down on this drip irrigation idea, which at the time had no reason to think it would succeed. And boom, it becomes now a nearly $1 billion industry in Israel, just this one company, and multi-billion around the world.
And should get much larger. Possibly only 5% of irrigated land uses drip irrigation.
That's right. I'm going to make a flat-out prediction that although the drip irrigation companies themselves are not public entities, if they were, these would be buy and hold situations, because the world must, there is no question about this, the world has no choice about converting over to drip irrigation. Otherwise, our aquifers will be pumped dry. Otherwise, we're going to run out of surface water. This is the only way we're going to be able to produce the food we need with the amount of water that we have. And that's with or without climate change issues.
Just go through the numbers here again for me. So drip irrigation, as I recall from your book, and I think this is a study in the Netherlands, a 550% increase in yield and with a 40% saving in water.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. Not only, and this is the inventor had not planned this, he invented it just to save water. The idea of, instead of flooding a field, just drip little bits of water on the roots when they need it, and then the plant will be fine. As it turned out, by not stressing the plant, it responds just sort of the way you and I would. And it produces a much more robust yield, always at least 25% more food. And sometimes, as in the case, study that you mentioned in the Netherlands, it was 550% greater yield. It's a remarkable enhancement to both the income of farmers as well as to food security in a world that's going to become more and more food insecure.
Recycling and wastewater. Israel is the biggest recycler of household water. It was up in the 80%.
High, close to 90%. And by the way, just for order of context, in the United States we're at about 7%. The only other country in the world that uses even double digits is Spain, and that's the high teens, low 20s. So Israel in the almost 90% level is a model for the world. And once again, within 10 years, is sort of almost disgusting as this sounds to many of your viewers, I'm sure, the idea that we're going to take sewage, treat it as we are able to do so, treat it to an ultra high level where if you had to do it, you could drink it. You don't have to, though.
Well, you've seen the video this year. Bill Gates has funded a machine, and he's actually drunk water out of it.
Well, good luck. Good luck. It's good to be Bill Gates for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
For a lot of reasons. But I don't know that you or I want to actually be drinking that water. But the great news is that water is perfectly good, usable water for agriculture. And what we will be doing within 10 years is either pumping it to nearby farms or building farms nearby to where the sewage is. It just makes too much sense. It's too valuable a resource.
Let's look at one other issue, the energy needed to create, say, desalination, to push water around. Is it worth it from a carbon perspective, from an energy perspective, from a cost perspective?
Well, a couple of comments about it. First of all is, in many regions of the world, I have no doubt that desalination will be run by photovoltaic, by solar power. And even already in Israel, there's a large open area in the Negev desert that's filled with photovoltaic cells that are generating energy. There is, in terms of regional cooperation, I coined the phrase in the book, hydro diplomacy. It's been used by Israel for, believe it or not, to integrate their economies with Jordan and Israel Israel and the Palestinians in some ways to build together. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if in a few years Jordan is providing lots of solar power to help generate desalination plants, and water shared amongst the parties. But the energy that's used now is significant. There's no question about it. On the other hand, all of modern industrial life uses a lot of energy. We need to find ways of becoming more energy efficient. And even in there, Israel shows the way to some extent. What the most recent desalination plant built in Israel is the world's largest. It is the lowest cost per gallon of water, and here's the good news. It's the lowest amount of energy used and carbon fuel used per gallon of water.
Excellent.
And so therefore, what was once upon a time an intensively energy process is today actually still significant, but getting better all the time. And if we switch over to renewables, then it will be really a non-issue.
Excellent. Seth, thanks very much for coming on. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I'm Antony Currie. Join us again soon for another segment of The Exchange.